Dr. Supal Iyer, author of a book titled Aid Dependence in Cambodia, How Foreign Assistance Undermined Democracy, has been invited back to Washington, D.C. to talk about the lessons that Burma can learn from Cambodia during the country's transition to democracy. VOA Khmer reporter Michael Singh has the interview.
Good afternoon, Dr. Iyer.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to Washington. You will be speaking at a forum in Washington, sharing a lesson that Cambodia has with Burma. So can you tell us what kind of lesson can Cambodia share with Burma?
Well, I think Cambodia's experience with foreign aid is one that Burma, Myanmar will be facing in the coming years, the kind of intensive donor support that sometimes brings with it negative consequences. Burma already has one of the worst rankings in terms of corruption. Cambodia shares these rankings, and I think it's important to see how the effects of foreign aid mixed in with, with that will have on increasing incentives for corruption, incentives for growth that isn't shared among the people of Burma.
Now, turning back to your books, Aid Dependence in Cambodia, you have talked to some observer or analysts who kind of say Cambodian democracy is fading away day by day. And sooner or later, if this trend continues, Cambodia will go away where there's only one party system. So in your opinion, how can we stop this trend or reverse it back to 1993, where they said democracy at the time was at its peak?
Right. So what you've had is not the consolidation of democracy. I would say up until this last election, you saw essentially democracy becoming a tool of the ruling party, the use of elections to advance its political agenda and to consolidate its rule. But democracy, I think, has had is not yet dead. And in the July elections, the outcome was a surprise to all, and I think part of that has been because of the demographic shifts in Cambodia. The youth vote made it impossible for the ruling party to take for granted the support that it assumed it would receive from those who remembered how the Vietnamese had saved them and how, as a result of that, they needed to support the ruling party. So I think it's more likely now that that there'll be more vocal support for opposition views. But at the same time, the ruling party isn't stupid. They're going to adjust in the next election. They're already adjusting their tactics, and they have changed certain ministers in order to accommodate the criticisms of the opposition, without, of course, letting the opposition get much of its agenda through, meaning not sworn in, not able to take positions of power that are significant. So still marginalizing the opposition in that sense.
And the new government, you might have already known, has introduced this so-called deep reform. Do you think this is going to work the opposition's way or the government way?
Well, I think it's at this point, it's hard to tell. I do worry that it's old wine in a new bottle. Things appear to be different on the surface, but inside the method of operating may remain the same, which has to do with patronage and control of electoral politics through resources that then get reallocated to the countryside in order to garner more votes. I think that it's a good thing that you're changing people who've been there for a long time, but if those people are simply the same old folks who were in the ministry before, that were at lower levels but have been promoted, it doesn't mean that you're letting change happen on its own in that manner. And
on your book, Aid Dependency, now Cambodia government sector has employed around 350,000 workers, mostly women, and also generate around $3 billion annually. So do you think this should be enough for the government to kind of stop, depend on foreign money and say, okay, donor, let's get out of my way?
Well, I think it's clearly not enough. You would need another garment sector every year to accommodate the number of young people who are turning 18 in Cambodia. So there's never enough employment taking place in Cambodia, and to say that the garment sector by itself would suffice is wholly inadequate. I also think these are very different things. One is a sector in which young women typically are working to bring money and remit them to the countryside where their parents live, and the other has to do with actual development activities in Cambodia. So the real question is China's money in Cambodia making a difference to the point where the Prime Minister can say something like, "We don't need your aid anymore, America. Why don't you cut it off already? Stop talking about it."
Yeah, talking about China's money, in your book you say the arrival of China on the donor stage makes solution even harder to come by. And then your book also argued that in terms of ownership, this government doesn't own that much international money. So don't you think the Chinese money normally come without string attached, and it also go to development project like infrastructure proposed by the government? Doesn't it a little bit more than Western money that go to ownership?
Well, I think the Chinese money always comes with strings attached. It's just that you don't see the strings explicitly, right? So the strings are that then when you chair ASEAN, you're expected to ventriloquate China's position on the South China Sea, or when Uyghurs try to get asylum in your country, you ship them off on a chartered flight the day before the Vice President of China, and then Xi Jinping, now President of China, shows up in your country to sign $1.2 billion worth of aid and investment. So I think there are strings. It's just Cambodia has been willing to allow these strings, has been willing to forsake some of its sovereignty and foreign policy in order to accommodate China in exchange for resources, financial resources that it deems worthy. But I would think that the type of development that takes place from that money isn't necessarily better, or isn't focused certainly on governance or human rights, which is, I think, critical for a country's evolution.
But also in terms of governance, your book also argued that some development project was actually devised by donor itself and passed on to the government, and they just parroted and pretend as if it is proposed by the government. That's the reason why there's a lack of ownership.
Right.
So if the Cambodian government go with their own project and put back to request to donor, will the donor accept that?
Well, I think the important approach to development needs to be one that is led by people who want to own the development activity, and it cannot be the donors. They're not the owners of the development activities. They should not be. In any case, they're not the ones who live in Cambodia permanently. It ought to be Cambodians, and it ought to be in such a way that after they've set their priorities, donors should support these priorities. So in Ethiopia, for example, the reputation of that country is very, very much that the government has set up priorities that it wants supported by donors. If the donors come and want to do other things, the Ethiopian authorities will say, "Thank you very much, we're not interested in that. We want you to support what we're doing." Now, obviously I would hope that with the reforms, the deep reforms being talked about in Cambodia, that this newfound attitude would emerge in Cambodia's approach to its development partners. But we'll have to see whether that happens or not, or whether it'll be more of the same, which is to say, if you have money, you can play, and if you don't have money, you can't play.
Also, you talk about getting rid of the gatekeeper of the donor money, and also improve governance, and also get rid of corruption. So these are actually recipe for self-destruction for some ruling elite in Cambodia. Do you think they are willing to do that, to kind of killing themselves?
Right. So I think the idea there is if they act as gatekeepers, say, to globalization, to the ability of the country to bring in technology, the internet, and other things in order to profit from standing at the gate and preventing it from coming in, or letting it in but making them pay for it to come in, I would argue that the growth that has been seen in Cambodia, the 10% in the 2000s per year growth in the Cambodian economy, could have been much higher had they shared more of it and been less greedy with corruption. So, in other words, they can engage in their corruption, but they could benefit so much more if they had invested more resources in growing Cambodia's economy equitably. So, infrastructure, health, education, these things can make people add more value in the work that they do, which would then make the economy bigger, which would then allow everybody to win as a result.
Okay. Finally, you start your book by talking about your personal story, especially your respected and heroic mother. And you also end your book with your personal hope for Cambodia. Do you think that someday some group of people in Cambodia will stand up, say enough is enough, and let's try a new leadership and be our own boss?
Well, I think they've already started to do that with this past election. They clearly were willing to vote not according to what was expected of them, but of course the outcome has been disputed and it hasn't been settled yet in terms of the opposition's willingness to accept whether the vote was 55 seats out of 123 or insistence that it was in fact 63 seats that they won. But I think it's an indication that young people are not tied to the past. They're willing to look at the future, and they have been dissatisfied with what's been offered to them, and as a result are standing up for what they consider to be their expectations for the future. And whether it happens now or happens later, it will eventually happen, because nobody lives forever and can rule the country forever.
Just a matter of time, right?
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Ia, for talking to VOA.
Thank you.